is Thursday, September 3rd, 2020. Welcome back. This is the last episode for this week, and we have an amazing guest. We have Scott Ford, who's the CEO and co-founder of Corgibytes. Hi, Scott, who's chiming in from Richmond, Virginia. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. And we have Carlos Ponce, my co-host, who is joining us as well. Hey, Carlos, welcome back. So today, let's get right into it and talk and get to know you a little bit, Scott, before we get into this topic. We have this amazing topic, which is really like top of mind for a lot of people. And it's a challenge for a lot of software engineers who are great, but are really great sometimes, like what I like to call them closet engineers, right? They're good in a place by themselves, but they struggle with teams. So let's see if we can unfold this today and find a way for some of these folks who are challenged with working in a team environment to embrace working in a team environment. But before we do that, let's get to know you a little bit, Scott. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, so I'm Scott, and I've been working as a software developer for, 20 plus years now. And my fascination and my passion is working with systems that already exist. So working with either legacy code or projects that are starting to feel as if they have a legacy that's holding them back. I really like to help teams dive into those code bases and make them better, breathe new life into them. And that's something that's my passion, and it's what I genuinely love doing. I like cleaning up messes that other people have created, and I find that more gratifying and more valuable than starting something from scratch.
Fun. So you're the guy who started out as an engineer, but really focused on the people aspects of the business, which is great. So tell us a little bit about Corgibytes. What gave birth to this idea? What do you guys do? Tell me a little bit about what it is.
Yeah, so it was born a lot of it out of my passion to help teams maintain and improve applications they already have. So that's all we do. We only work with existing systems. Old code, new tricks is our tagline. And we work with any technology or any platform or any framework that a team might be struggling with. And we, like to dive into code bases that need help and need love. And we wrangle them and start to fix them. We think of the software ecosystem as having two kinds of developers in it. There are people who are makers and there are people who are menders. And we're a team of menders. We're a team of people who enjoy and find joy in that improvement work that other people would rather not do.
I like it. So we're going to go into this a little bit, but I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's developers, then there's QA teams, and there's testers, and then there's the guys who come in when all that's failed to clean up the mess, right? The garbage men, right?
Janitors.
Yeah. The cleanup crew. Okay, so let's go right into it. Carlos, what's the topic of conversation today, and what's the question that we're answering? Please introduce the show today. I'm not sure Carlos got it. So let's just go right into it then. I think you might be having a little bit of internet problem. So today you chose a topic. Communication is just as important as code. And the idea of a lone developer coding without social interaction or good communication skills is a thing of the past. Why is this so relevant today, especially with what's happened in the past 6 months? You would think, well,
Absolutely.
with remote work.
Thank you, Tulio, and thanks to our guest today. Today we're going to be talking
We're
about
delayed.
communication. Yeah.
We're delayed again with your voice. Okay, so let's go right into it, Scott. What's this? Why do you think this is so relevant today? I would think today with COVID and people working from home, it's more open to working alone. What's the, why do you think this topic is relevant?
Well, software in general, there are many software developers who are trained early in their career that they're not as good talking with people, and like communicating with people is just something that they're not as good at, or communicating in general is something they're not as good at. Like it's something that I was heard from others and was told early in my career that don't talk to the customer because you put your foot in your mouth or you say the wrong things all the time, things of that sort. And I really started to believe that. And it wasn't until I worked with my business partner, Andre Goulet, that I really started to unpack and realize that no, I do have these social skills, and I can leverage them and use them, and I can learn to use them better. And so when we set out and created our core values, we stumbled on this core value of communication being just as important as code. So that while as software developers, our intuition is to focus just on the software itself, just on the binary bits and bytes and just the source code. It's while that's important, it's also important to make sure that the communication and the communication infrastructure that we're setting up around our software systems is maintained just the same way we would maintain the software itself.
So Scott, in relation to the topic today, right, why communication is just as important as code, and in relation to what you do as a company, where you basically the guys go in to clean it up, right, when something's broken or something's gotten messy, is there a correlation between working as a loner, if you will, versus working in a team environment and having more open communication with the quality of the code that gets produced? Can you share some examples of where you've seen that and improvement that can be made just by simply engaging more as a team? What's the ratio of quality code versus for one versus the other in your experience?
Yeah, empathy plays a big part. So, having a team that that helps a lot with you understanding the challenges. So like if you create something and they have to consume it and you're noticing that they're having trouble doing so, then you can use your natural empathy to improve that communication pipeline. And when you're working by yourself, this still happens, but it's delayed. So when you're a solo developer, you'll find yourself you're working on something and then working on something else, and you'll come back to that original thing that you're working on. But now you don't remember why you did it the way you did it or exactly how it works because you didn't leave yourself enough breadcrumbs. And so when you're working with others, more frequently, you end up having to leave these breadcrumbs so that you can communicate with the team members. And working at a distance forces us to can actually be an enabler for better communication. In some ways, because it forces us to write down communication that we might have otherwise just had face to face, and maybe by the water cooler or walking by the soda machine. Conversations of that sort are ephemeral and they get lost and they don't get recorded. Whereas now that we're all at a distance, conversations are more likely to get recorded in some form.
Okay, so what you're saying is that if you're working alone, you don't have any checks and balances with other teammates. So you might get to a place where you spend all this time, invested all this energy building something that could be amazing, but you don't have any way to trace back something. You might have missed a step or something could have happened that someone else could have caught. So in essence, the quality of the work you do alone ends up being less than the quality of work you would do working in a team environment.
Yeah.
How do you make that shift for those individuals who are used to doing that, right? They're used to coding alone, right? How do they make that shift to be more team oriented? And perhaps those who struggle with the communication skills, if you will, how do you help them through that? What's been your experience in helping those individuals who have struggled with that make this shift?
Yeah, I think, again, empathy is a big part of it. So helping people who are making that shift understand where their colleagues are coming from and the challenges their colleagues are having with their communication style, but also understanding the flip side. So that person's colleagues understanding that they're coming from a place where their communication skills aren't as strong as other people, and giving them a little bit of grace, and finding ways and techniques to work with them where they're at. So that's a really kind of important, like, just recognize there's a give and take. It shouldn't be all on either party. It shouldn't be all on the developer to learn to be an expert communicator. And it shouldn't be all on the team members who are more experienced communicating to become expert developers to be able to communicate effectively with a developer. That's just, both are unrealistic, but we can learn about each other's disciplines. And that's really where the beauty comes in.
Okay. So as a team, you really should just sort of figure out who works how, in what fashion, right? And try to work with it. So it's not about forcing the issue or making everyone have to work a certain way, or all of a sudden, if you like to work alone, you have to work with everybody. It's finding that balance where everyone can have some input and respect each other's boundaries so that you can get the best outcome. So in some example, if you don't mind, give us some examples where you guys went in and it was just terribly bad. Like the code base was awful. Like if you did a post-mortem on those situations, can you pinpoint a few things where the breakdown happened? And out of that, were there some improvements that you guys suggested in terms of practices that could have avoided those problems? I'd love to hear some of those stories in terms of what your company has done, Corgibytes, to go in, fix the problem, but also provide lessons of like, this is kind of what happened. The post-mortem shows this. Here's what you can avoid in the future. Are you guys doing that? Can you give us some examples of where you've applied that?
Sure. I won't name any names because I don't want to embarrass any of our clients. But there have been scenarios over the years where we've gone in and we've seen code bases that look like they're kind of cobbled together in a hurry, which makes sense. Like when people are in a hurry, they cut corners, and sometimes when you're in a really big hurry, you cut really big corners. And we try to think of it. We look at software systems that we look at through the lens of everyone who worked on it did their best, like given the constraints they have at the time. That said, it could still be better, and that's why we're brought in is to help make things better. One way that we find that things really can be better is to follow a practice of code review. So make sure that there's another human on your team who looks at the work that you've done and gives you some feedback on it. And it could be feedback of like, yeah, you did a great job, or this isn't good enough. This doesn't quite meet our quality standards. And just having that in place, we think would catch a lot of problems. And there are many teams that we work with that don't have that practice, or if they do have that practice, they're not writing them down. They're not keeping evidence of their collaboration. We're not seeing evidence of kind of what the thought process is. Sometimes it'll just like, there will be a review, but it's just kind of, they're all rubber stamps. There's no communication, no back and forth, which makes us think that if there is a review that's happening, it's likely happening face to face and things are getting cleaned up. And then there's no record, no durable record of why changes were made or how it was made better.
I got a question myself, and please let me know if I'm coming through loud and clear because I have some glitches. And
You're good. You're good.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. I apologize. So listen, Scott, I'd like to ask you something related to the communication side. And just for the record, I'm not an engineer, and so my background is precisely as a communicator because that's my major. I am a major in communication sciences. So my question is more about the international teams in which the language part plays a good role. For example, we might have distributed teams across multiple countries, and for practical reasons, well, there's a high probability that English might be like the common language because it's that's how tech is like. So, given this the use of language, what I would like to ask you is, in this scenario of multiple cultures, multiple languages, language plays a major role. But there are other aspects, that maybe soft skills or cultural awareness, even body language. All those elements that come in play when communicating properly across multiple nations and cultures. So, what would you say from your perspective that besides the language part, what other elements would be we cannot just miss? What is like an essential element so as to communicate seamlessly and effectively across multiple cultures or geographies?
Yeah, it's the cultural aspect is a challenge because something that I might think is common or normal, someone else might find offensive. I might use a phrase that someone else might find offensive. So, those kind of cultural barriers, in addition to the language, or the way I gesture, I might be using a gesture that someone else finds offensive. And so helping your team members who might be unaware of those, recognize when they're kind of stumbling into that. And there's a framework for that I really like by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. And that's where you do kind of build up enough trust with your teammates that they do care about you, but they're still giving you direct feedback even though they care about you. And so that's one where I think it really helps to kind of level that out when people are making kind of communication gotchas or kind of faux pas, so to speak. That helps a lot, and it kind of helps with kind of some of that cultural awareness and say like, well, in our culture, this is the way we like to solve problems. It could be like the way that people are working. It could be the way that problems are getting solved. Having a sense of that cultural awareness and the way that's kind of acting as a lens in the way people are targeting things, that can be really helpful. Okay.
Yeah, and also there's something else. In the case of software companies, either software development or engineering, providing services for software as a service companies, we firmly believe that the level of the quality of the communication is reflected upon the end result of the quality of the product itself.
Absolutely.
So, right. So, would you say that? Let me rephrase my thoughts. How would you say that good communication could be good for business in general?
Yeah. So I think there's one law by Mel Conway called Conway's Law, and it's a kind of a organizational systems observation that was made first in the software arena, but then has been expanded out to other arenas. And the idea is that any system that an organization creates will be a mirror of the communication structures that organization has. So for a lot of organizations, if they're unhappy with the systems that they've created, whether they be software systems or communication systems or any other kind of systems that they might be building, if they're unhappy with the way those systems have turned out, yes, look at the system and the way it was put together, but also be introspective about the way the organization is structured itself, and kind of recognize that if you want to differentiate yourself in the market, a way to do that might be to change up your organization. And so that could be a way that, an awareness of communication and kind of the effects in both directions can help you stand out in the market better than you were before.
Okay, great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott. Tulio, please.
Yeah, I find it interesting. What I'm hearing is that organizations not only need to develop the skill set that the engineers or any employee really have to do their jobs, but to be effective at doing it, there also needs to be some kind of peer-to-peer review or check and balance communication or breadcrumbs, as you mentioned, that allows individuals to have not necessarily someone looking over their shoulder, but someone validating and helping to make sure that you didn't miss something, right? Which is just a smart way of doing things. But then there's two more things that have nothing to do with software skills at all, which is, well, you mentioned one is develop more empathy. So the ability to relate to someone, whether they're in a different culture, different mindset, different creed, whatever's going on, the ability to have higher levels of empathy will allow each of us to be able to relate differently to each other. And then also this idea of educating the teams about differences, where instead of demonizing the differences and making an assumption this is how they are and it's wrong, it's more like, well, what is it about this that's offensive? And maybe learning to give each other a break to say, okay, this is just a practice that seems to be okay here, but it's offensive based. So how do we create a model where we become aware of this and learn from each other so that we have more common ground? So it seems as though it's not just a combination of being a good coder. You have to also learn to become a good human being, right?
Yes.
I mean, you have to essentially right.
Software developers are human beings, and we can't let them off the hook for that. Does it make sense? Just because we need their skills so much? I think that's what's been happening for quite a while. Is there have been developers that have been allowed to be really abrasive or curt and not kind to other other colleagues that are not software developers themselves, and that really needs to stop. I think industry wide, like we just need to have more tolerance. The software developers specifically need to have more tolerance for the way that other people work and the way other people think, and recognize that not everybody knows how to write software, nor does everyone need to know how to write software. And we should be able to communicate with those people as a human being, without making them feel stupid or kind of inducing any kind of shame or things like that.
Yeah, I'm also wondering how much of that is systemic in terms of usually a software engineer team kind of get the end of it in terms of like, here's the strategy, here's what's been decided, now go code it, right?
Yes.
They haven't necessarily been involved in the process of developing that idea or actually thinking through the strategy of a product roadmap. And I would think that probably creates some resentment and animosity in the sense that like, oh, you just want me, I'm the guy who's going to build this, right? You're counting on me, but I didn't get involved to begin with. So would you say that perhaps part of the change that also needs to happen is get these guys involved early, have them at the table in the sales and marketing discussions as the company's facing what needs to happen next so that they can, one, make contributions, two, see what's coming down the pike and not feel so left field and then be basically held accountable to make it happen when I haven't had any say on it. Would you say that would help a lot in terms of removing some of this animosity that happens sometimes?
It would help a lot. And another thing that would help a whole bunch is to not only include people in the room, but when you do, don't present them with solutions, but present them with problems. So software developers and other kinds of engineers we're naturals at solving problems, and we can think of really clever and creative ways to do so. And sometimes when a solution is told to us, like we're told, go build this, like that's now a new problem. And if we don't have the full context, like we may have been able to find a way to do it faster or cheaper, but we were left out of that part of the conversation. And the solution that we're told, like it might make sense from other aspects, right? But the solution doesn't make technical sense. And so like recognize that there's some of that like give and take that needs to take place, like something that makes a lot of sense for the market or may make a lot of sense for the organization from a strategic perspective might not make strategic sense when you look at the impact on the technology. And there might be a clever way to solve the same thing, if the question is just posed to the engineers differently.
So what would you recommend? I mean, should the engineering team be proactive and say, hey guys, I want to be involved in your discussions, and vice versa? Who's going to lead that charge to bridge that disconnect or that gap that exists today? What have you seen working really well to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think an organization that treats their CTO or their CIO as someone who's kind of involved in those strategic discussions, and not just kind of viewing technology as a cost center, but really kind of viewing it as something that is kind of can be a strategic enabler. That's a big part of it. I think it can kind of help to make sure you have that mentality at the most senior leadership of the organization. And at the same time, if you have a CTO or a CIO who's traditionally kind of like been kind of hands off about the rest of the business, really kind of helping them kind of get smart about some of the other constraints that other aspects of the business are under, so that they can maybe identify problems early, and so they're not just a part of the organization that's in reactive mode all the time, but they can also help kind of proactively solve problems as well.
I think we've sort of answered the question of why some larger organizations who try to build some innovation in-house often end up acquiring startups or outsourcing the work to smaller entities, because in a startup, the founders, CTOs are heavily involved in the strategy all the way, from the very beginning. So it's clearly they're influencing the strategy of the product and producing results a lot faster than some of the larger organizations that have, as you mentioned, traditional walls between these departments that sound like they need to come down. So how do we help these organizations take down those walls? Any tips of advice for CEOs to try to break that up and get the CTOs and CIOs of these large organizations to be at the strategic table and change the model?
I would say like you just start inviting them in, and also like invite them in to the challenges that that the CEO is facing and the other leaders of the company are facing, but really also ask for to try to step up and learn what the challenges of that department are. And again, don't just treat it as a cost center, or don't just treat it as something that has to a reactionary department or reactionary part of the business, but as one that you can kind of think of as a true peer.
Well, Scott, it's been a pleasure to have you so far on the show. It's clear that when it comes to improving communication, you have to break down the walls, right?
Yes.
The separation
it's hard to talk to each other through a wall.
You got to break down the walls and the departmental differentiate. You just got to break it down and think a little bit more agile, like a startup, and start to get people talking with each other that are not necessarily historically been doing that. So thanks for sharing that with us. As we wrap up, your journey as an entrepreneur for yourself, as building a company, as a CEO of a company, what's that been like for you? Any lessons you've learned about yourself in the process of trying to get people to talk to each other and communicate and stay, connected as a team?
A lot of it's been through my own experience, and so I'm very new to the CEO role. It was a shift that my business partner and I just made recently. So she stepped down as CEO and is going to be Chief Strategy Officer, and I'm stepping into the CEO role where I had been CTO before. So definitely, like I feel like I'm growing in a lot of ways, and having to be aware of issues that I was able to kind of leave to somebody else before. So that is like, I'm gaining a lot more empathy of what it's like to be in the CEO's shoes as a result. And I also think like just looking back on my career, and how really early on when I was working with others, especially around giving feedback, I would just give very rude, very abrupt feedback without really caring how it might be received by the other person. And so I think that's one thing that I've really learned over the years is, I can to learn how to be direct, but without being a jerk. And that's, that can be a tough balance, but that's what's needed.
Great words of advice. Well, it's been great to have you with us. Stay with us as we wrap up. Carlos, what do we got coming up next week? We've got a recap show on Monday where we take 10 minutes to recap this week's shows, 3 shows. We try to highlight the key points. This is going to be an interesting one to try to highlight in a few minutes. So we welcome you guys all to come back at 1 p.m. Pacific on Monday. And if you would like to participate and be one of the windows here, we welcome that too. Just drop a comment wherever you're watching saying, I'd like to be part of the recap show. And we would love to have you comment and give your feedback. So we are opening that up to audiences who want to participate. And then what do we got coming up next week, Carlos? We've got 3 more shows, I think.
No,
right?
Actually, curiously, Tulio, as you know, we're kind of packed until the end of October, almost near November. But for some reason, we're still waiting for a couple of confirmations for next week. But we only have one like set in stone for next week, and that is going to be with Mark Westlake, the CEO and founder of GearBrain. And the topic is going to be interesting. It's going to be about smart technology, and basically the topic is smart tech and your home, building your own Jarvis. So that's what the topic is for next week on Wednesday. Like I said, we're still waiting for confirmation for Tuesday and Thursday. Please keep an eye on the DojoLIVE website, because as soon as I get the topics and the confirmations, they're going to be up there, hopefully between now and the end of the day tomorrow. And that's what we have.
I want to make a quick correction. Next Monday is a holiday, so we probably do the recap show on Tuesday of next week. So there you go.
Thanks there you have it.
I was like, something's off. I just figured it out. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you again next week. And stay with us, Scott, as we wrap up. Stay safe, everyone.